All right, so Kash Patel, that's a good segue. I was going to ask you about that. All right, so you tweeted about this. He's the first public defender to run the FBI.
I believe so. I haven't
He's
done a fully in-depth study of every
I
FBI, but
think
I think
that's
that's true.
I think that's a safe bet. It's not like this is a 200-year-old agency. And he's probably, I think we can safely say he is the very first pick to head the FBI who has authored fan fiction about the president. Now, you mentioned it's a good thing. He wants transparency with the FISA courts, but he also wants to ramp up pursuit of journalists with the kind of agenda that ended up imprisoning Julian Assange. Um, to me, I look at this guy. I honestly, I see a dangerous wacko who's going to turn the FBI into the NKVD. And sometimes you point that out. People say, "Well, what do you think they're doing now?" Yeah, sure. They abuse their power now. We interviewed one of the victims of the Newberg sting. We're well aware of that. But you're talking about a deranged loyalist who really sees no division between the will of the president and the duties of the agency. When you put all that together, that sounds to me like just a blatant out and out secret police on the Hoover level, if not even beyond that. So what is your take?
I think that's kind of overstated. Look, I've not been one to shirk from, I think, explaining what I believe to be some of the issues with other Trump cabinet appointments. But I do think that the Kash Patel one is a bit of an exception, at least preliminarily. So here are some open questions that I would have. Obviously, Kash Patel is an extreme Trump loyalist. There's no doubt about that. He authors children's books where he's like the little assistant wizard along with King Trump, and they're defeating their enemies together and restoring justice to the land.
I'm sorry, that's nutty, man.
That is a little nutty. That is a little nutty. But if you read Kash Patel's other book, and I haven't read the whole thing, but I've skimmed portions of it. It's called Government Gangsters. He does put forward some civil libertarian reform proposals for the FBI and the security state bureaucracy as a whole. So as I mentioned in that thread, he says that the FISA court should, for one thing, have a court reporter present for all proceedings, which amazingly does not occur at this point. It's a secret court. So you can't even get a record of what occurs in a FISA court proceeding unless you happen to be physically present and then you're sworn to secrecy. Right. He wants to have basically an advocate present that in absentia will sort of, functionally represent the accused against whom the government is seeking a surveillance warrant, which doesn't exist. So if you're somebody who the government who is seeking an incredibly invasive FISA warrant against, you have no representation at all within the FISA system now. He wants some advocate present. He wants to more streamline and expedite declassification of government records, because when he was in power in the first Trump administration, whether it was in as a senior staff member on the House Intelligence Committee or in the Pentagon or in the at the DNI's office, he talks about how he was always trying to get certain things declassified, usually that related to Trump. So it is sort of myopic in its focus on Trump himself and trying to do things at his behest. But nonetheless, he was always seeking declassification, and he would be opposed by other elements of the security state who didn't want to agree or accede to declassification of various government records on spurious grounds. And so one of his proposals is to create a dedicated office to more regularly declassify records, right, and also kind of centralize the classification regimen so that different agencies can't use their own different classification criteria to keep stuff withheld.
Well, he's talking about the JFK files. He's talking about 9/11, right?
I don't know if he's talking about 9/11 or the JFK files in particular. Mostly he's talking about Russiagate. Okay. He's talking about stuff that bears directly on Trump, but then he claims to broaden it out into just a general policy reform. Now, I don't know if he'll pursue that. I don't know if it really is so exclusively focused on Trump that he actually doesn't care about the underlying principle. Then it's sort of all for naught. I frankly would still like to see all the full breadth of like Russiagate related documents, because I covered that very closely at the time. And there really were, quote unquote, deep state, which is not a term that I use with much sincerity anymore because it's kind of just become a Republican buzzword. But there were like permanent bureaucracy factions, security state interests that did themselves sort of collude against Trump as they were accusing Trump of illicit collusion with Russia. So even if Kash Patel only extricates those documents, there would be some value to that. I guess the open question is, are these reforms that he claims that he's proposing, are they just strictly about advancing Trump's interests?
That's my concern.
Or
and that's how
are they as broad-based as he's indicated that he would like to see them as? I don't know. I think that is an open question. So obviously, so could his sycophancy for Trump, which is well established, also by happenstance be a vehicle through which some more generalized reforms are implemented? I think that's possible.
Right.
And I would not have probably been compelled to acknowledge such a possibility with virtually any other FBI director. So I think that's at least worth noting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that sums up pretty much my feelings exactly about him. You know, I think the FBI is essentially a criminal organization at this point. I think a lot of the people who, you know, really fearmonger about the sort of pre-Watergate FBI tend to understate the just criminal abuses of the modern day FBI. So that's one thing. But then obviously, I think what you said is absolutely right. So far, he has mentioned 9/11, he's mentioned JFK, he's mentioned Epstein, but the real emphasis has been on going after the enemies of Trump, including journalists who he basically said, you know, tried to rig the election for Joe Biden, tried to, you know, either I won't say plant evidence, but concoct narratives around Russiagate that ended up being totally wrong. And I don't have any love for those journalists, but I think you have to satisfy a very high bar before you get to the point of, well, we're going to go after them legally, either civilly or criminally. And then the other thing about Kash Patel,
the danger for people in our space of an FBI director who writes children book fan fiction about the president promising to pursue journalists. It's extremely dangerous. Whatever reforms he might be promising, which I do see it as very angled towards, yes, he wants reforms insofar as they serve his kind of creepy worship of Donald Trump.
Yeah, like if you read the Project 2025 document, which I think liberals were overly histrionic about.
I agree.
And were panicked about for all the wrong reasons. But if you go and actually read it, and liberals didn't care about this part, they didn't care that in Project 2025, it does propose some bureaucratic reorganization of different security state agencies, including the FBI, the DNI, the NSA, CIA, etc. But it's all to enhance the power ultimately of those agencies to serve the president's interests.
Right.
Or to be more politically responsive to the president, which in principle is not a totally objectionable idea. Like, why should it be that the FBI and the CIA are insulated from the same sort of political incentives that are operative with any other agency? I mean, this is kind of an antiquated or anachronistic concept, I think, including, you know, the idea that it's, you know, outrageous for Trump to install his own FBI director. Like, why is that? Like, why should the FBI director be unique among senior government officials and not having to be appointed by the incoming president? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, you can easily revise that custom and not be like obliterating all norms like the liberals want to tell us. But I think the question is, but like nowhere in that Project 2025 document do they ever really talk about dismantling the deep state in the sense of disempowering the security state agencies. Like they want them just as powerful as ever. They just want to do some bureaucratic reorganization so they're more responsive to like the directives coming from the executive, which is an issue.
Yes.
So if like you're a libertarian or something who like does want to actually disempower some of these security state agencies and circumscribe their authorities, limit their ability to do different things. I think you might be in for a rude awakening here, because it really is. It's not about actually limiting their powers per se. It's just about redirecting the powers in a more politically responsive direction. And if the one that they're responding to is Trump, you might not like that. I mean, does anybody think that Kash Patel, in conjunction with Trump, is going to like reduce the powers of the FBI in terms of fighting terrorism or something? I tend to doubt
speaking of that, I mean, right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly where I was taking this. So there's plenty of sound. You've probably shared some of this video on your X account of him saying explicitly, we covered in our segment last night, that Americans need to wake up and prioritize Israel. He is, as almost every single member of Trump's team is.
Kash Patel said that?
Yeah.
Can you play that? I actually haven't heard that.
Yeah, I can find it for you. I will certainly find it for you. I'll play it for you after you answer this, because I want to toss to you. He is a fanatical Zionist, and when you pair him with Pam Bondi, who said on Fox News recently that she wants pro-Palestine protesters interrogated by the FBI. Okay, so if the Department of Justice, run by Pam Bondi, passes off these protesters to his FBI, that paints a very, very bleak picture of what could happen.
You combine that with his views on pursuing journalists, and particularly people in our space who are not simply cheering on the dear leader, we could be in a lot of danger.
I think that's probably overstated as well. Like, I remember similar fears were vented in 2016.
I think it was different. I was not among those who believed that then.
Okay.
It's different this time. But
like Trump in 2016 talked about, we should reform the libel laws so that journalists are more, culpable for saying mean stuff about me or other politicians. Nothing ever came of that.
You didn't have what you have now, where you're installing Bondi, who, first of all, we're in a post-October 7th world. It's that in and of itself creates a very different situation, where you've got this furious, desperate attempt to control the narrative coming from AIPAC and Zionist supporters and sympathizers who are completely at odds with public opinion and are just increasingly willing to use blunt force tactics to beat down dissent and to beat dissenting voices out of the conversation. And then you've got a combination of an AG pick and an FBI director who are both foaming at the mouth, fanatical Israel supporters who are perfectly willing and able, theoretically, to suppress dissent that way, and are advertising in advance that that's exactly what they're going to do. I mean, I don't think the dangers can be overstated. That's very different than the situation in 2016.
There could be some differences, and you're right that the post-October 7th landscape is probably a decisive variable on all this. It gets to why I think it was lamentable how little Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s total bullshit. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Total bullshit was like critically covered, particularly in alternative media. I don't know about you guys in particular, but like when he endorsed Trump, he said that he and Trump agreed that they had to purge the so-called neocons together from the U.S. foreign policy apparatus. Then Trump just like appoints basically interchangeable people with who he appointed the first time, in which Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had denounced him for appointing.
Right.
And then on free speech, where they also claim to have this like amazing, marvelous, unifying agreement, it seemed like there was always a big exception out there, as usual, carved out for Israel, or speech pertaining to Israel. So this idea that the Republicans were the party of protecting free speech, I'm not defending the Democrats' record on free speech, but like, you have to have been hibernating for the past 13 months if you didn't know that the Republicans, with some Democrat support, but like the Republicans have been the driving force in launching like a total jihad against speech that's critical of Israel and using the coercive power of the state and trying to use the coercive power of the state to accomplish that. One of the biggest proponents of this mission has been Elise Stefanik, who Trump just named as UN ambassador. Yep. She's the one who helped ginned up the phony anti-Semitism controversies by throwing out these kind of like multi-part questions for the admittedly kind of idiotic college professors who didn't know how to like play her political game, and got them trapped and basically she had them ousted from office because the idea was that they were like acquiescing to or tacitly consenting to the genocide of Jews, which is absurd. And so, yeah, I mean, but RFK Jr. was able to funnel disaffected, hazily ideological people who wanted some third-party alternative, which he falsely claimed that he was going to be for 10 months, into the Republican fold, partially on the grounds of issues like grievance with U.S. foreign policy and speech. Right. And I think there's very little indication that in terms of speech critical of Israel, there's going to be anything but a crackdown. I mean, Trump has been calling for it. Trump, at the same time as RFK Jr. will go around as a Trump surrogate saying, "Oh, we're going to restore free speech." I mean, we got to restore Republican executive power to restore free speech in America. Trump will be saying, "I'm going to direct the Department of Justice to be deployed to college campuses,
right,
to punish speech critical of Israel, and to use the coercive power of the state to stifle speech critical of Israel." So there was no, I think, even attempt at reconciling those competing claims as usual. And so I'm not sure how much it'll translate into random YouTubers getting prosecuted by the Department of Justice. I tend to doubt that. But I mean, I could easily see what Kash Patel has also pledged, which is an even greater crackdown on leaks. So there's no reason why they couldn't repeat the Julian Assange prosecution, but for somebody else. Now, I mean, you might then have it contended that Kash Patel wants to couple his aggressive targeting of government leaks with a more expansive declassification effort. That remains to be seen whether that would be undertaken or not. But even if there is a more expansive declassification effort, I still think that wouldn't at all justify cracking down on government leaks, which sometimes are necessary to inform the public. And so to criminalize the journalist who possesses those leaks, just as the Trump administration did with Assange, I think could be a potentially ominous omen. But I wouldn't worry too much about a random YouTuber getting prosecuted, although who knows.
Here, I found this video since you asked for it. So this is Kash Patel on Israel.
Trump is elected. Imagine the efforts of the Israeli military and the Mossad combined with the maximum pressure of a new Trump administration against Iran.
Aaron's absolutely right. We should be side by side, and that can't happen unless we have an election that changes the commander-in-chief's seat. And when we are back in power with President Trump, you will see what we did with Israel and the Prime Minister and our special forces and their intel operation. We will be standing side by side with them. We will shut off the machinery that feeds money into Iran. We will no longer have 100 hostages still in captivity, Israeli and American and otherwise, by Hamas and Iran's Hezbollah mercenary forces. Donald Trump rescued 50 hostages and detainees. That's more than every president before him combined. And I hope he wins on November 5th. And Aaron's right. We need America to wake up and prioritize Israel. And that is not what Kamala Harris is about. We need to bring home Americans and end this war, bring home Israelis, and make sure we stand by our #1 ally in Israel. And people need to wake up when it comes to November 5th. Donald Trump's the only choice.
Kash Patel, Aaron Cohen, great to see you, gentlemen. Thank you.
So there you have it.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that. That's amazing. Americans need to finally wake up and learn to prioritize Israel. What's been prioritized over the past year, if not Israel? And that was amazing to me about this whole Trump.
Neglectful.
Yeah, we've been so neglectful and forgetful of prioritizing Israel. That's what was amazing to me about this campaign, where the Republicans and Trump couldn't have been more explicit. Their position on Israel was that Biden and Harris had been insufficiently supportive of Israel. Right. For all the unfettered armaments that Biden has provided Israel, more than any U.S. president ever, the Republicans were unanimous in saying it wasn't enough. There were too many constraints supposedly imposed on Israel that prevented them somehow from waging their pulverization campaign across Gaza and Lebanon and so forth. So that led me to therefore infer that because Biden had provided more war support for Israel than any U.S. president ever, and the Republicans were saying it wasn't enough, and not only that, but that the Democrats were somehow in hock to Hamas or kowtowing to anti-Semites, that makes Trump and the Republicans running on the most hardcore, zealous, pro-Israel, quote-unquote, platform of any major party nominee ever, which was true. And yet Trump was still able to go around with his like RFK and like Tulsi Gabbard supporters, giving voters the impression that he's the anti-war candidate. He's like the less war supportive candidate. So, I mean, it's just a total tangle of contradictions. I don't think, and like I could hear a MAGA person saying to me, Trump isn't against war. He's just for an America First policy disposition where you're trying to prevent war. Okay, the point is that over the course of this entire campaign, Trump was saying that the Biden administration was too restrictive of Israel.
Right.
They should have provided additional armaments to Israel. That they, in terms of ending the war in the Middle East, what Trump prescribed was allow Israel to get the job done even quicker, meaning allow them to pulverize even harder and faster.
Exactly.
So the fact that the Democrats had no standing to point out that issue with Trump is another, flaw in their overall campaign operation, obviously. But it still also was a huge fault of like people in the alternative media, people who did have this hanger-on mentality with RFK Jr. and co. That this line was allowed to persist without much refutation.
Please clap.